Recording.
Audio check 1, 2.
Good morning. Uh, yeah, we're ready to begin, and I will count from 5, and then we will start. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The subcommittee on early childhood, elementary, and secondary education will come to order. Welcome, everyone. I note that a quorum is present. I note for the subcommittee that Ms. Bonamici of Oregon or Mr. Bowman of Colorado is permitted to participate. Ms. Bonamici of Oregon is permitted to participate in today's hearing with the understanding that her questions will come only after all members of the Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education Subcommittee on both sides of the aisle who are present have had an opportunity to question the witnesses. If the chair needs to step away for any reasons, that gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Bowman, will sit and assume the chair the hearing until I return or some other arrangement is made. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on back to school, meeting students' academic, social, and economical needs, emotional needs. This is a hybrid hearing pursuant to House Resolution 8 and the regulations thereto. All microphones, both in the room and on the platform, will be kept muted as a general rule to avoid unnecessary background noise. Members and witnesses will be responsible for unmuting themselves when they are recognized to speak or when they wish to seek recognition. When members wish to speak or seek recognition, they should unmute themselves and allow a pause of 2 seconds to ensure the microphone picks up their speech. I also ask that members please identify themselves before they speak. Members who are participating in person should not be logged onto the remote platform in order to avoid feedback, echoes, and distortion. Members participating remotely shall be considered present in the proceeding when they are visible on camera, and they should be considered not present when they're not visible on camera. The only exception to this is if they're experiencing technical difficulty and inform the committee staff of such difficulty. If any member experiences technical difficulty during the hearing, you should stay connected on the platform. Make sure you are muted and use your phone to immediately contact the committee's IT director, whose number was provided in advance. Should the chair need to step away again for any reason, Mr. Bowman or another majority member is hereby authorized to assume the gavel in the chair's absence. In order to ensure that the committee's 5-minute rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time using the committee's digital timer on the remote platform. For members participating in person, the timer will be broadcast in the committee room on the television monitor as part of the platform gallery view and visible in its own thumbnail window. The committee room timer will not be in use. For members participating remotely, this would be visible in gallery view in its own thumbnail window on the remote platform. Members are asked to wrap up promptly when their time has expired. Finally, when the recent guidance from the Office of Attending Physician has made mask wearing optional at this time, please note that we have in our midst at both member and staff levels individuals who are immunocompromised and or who have immediate family members who are immunocompromised, as well as who are not vaccinated either due to medical reasons or because the vaccine is not yet available to children under 6 months of age. Therefore, the committee strongly recommends that masks continue to be worn out of its concern for the safety of unvaccinated and immunocompromised committee members and staff and their families. Now, pursuant to, that's the admin part of the logistics, the housekeeping. So pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, opening statements are limited to the chair and the ranking member. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and provides all members with adequate time to ask questions. I recognize myself now for the purpose of making an opening statement. As students across the nation, the country returned to the classroom for the 2022-2023 school year, the committee is meeting today to discuss how our nation's schools are helping students get back on track academically and meet their social and emotional needs. The pandemic underscored how important schools are to our nation's children, families, and communities. While the initial shift to online learning certainly saved lives, not being in the classroom impeded students' social and emotional development and disrupted the stability that helps young people thrive. That is why Democrats have been focused on providing key resources for students and educators so they could return to the classroom safely. Safely, that's a key word here. And thanks to President Biden's American Rescue Plan, nearly all public K-12 schools in the nation are now open for in-person learning. We know students and educators lost ground, however, academically, as evidenced by the most recent data from the National Assessments of Educational Progress, and in terms of social and emotional learning. And that is why the American Rescue Plan requires the school districts target 20% of funding towards addressing learning loss using evidence-based interventions and focusing on those students who were most impacted by the pandemic. We now have data from a national survey of more than 800 public schools conducted by the U.S. Department of Education that shows 98% of those schools are implementing learning recovery programs like tutoring and remedial instruction, and over 70% of those schools have shored up mental health supports. Let me give you just a few examples. In Virginia, a school district is using its rescue plan money to hire more tutors to help close achievement gaps. In Connecticut, a school district created a parent academy program to connect parents to their children's education. In Ohio, a school district used rescue plan funding to create a family resource center, a one-stop shop that connects families to mental health resources and support services. In North Carolina, a school district was able to bring in more mental health counselors. And in my district, the Northern Mariana Islands, schools used the American Rescue Plan funding for a summer learning program and hired more teachers to work with students who need additional support. Importantly, these programs are already showing signs of success. Research estimates that high-dosage tutoring 3 times a week for a year can help students gain 19 weeks in instructional time, that a double dose of math each day for a year can produce 10 weeks of gains, and that summer learning can help students gain the equivalent of 5 more weeks. Additionally, the research shows that social and emotional learning programs can significantly improve student achievement performance and social behaviors while also lowering levels of distress. Simply put, Democrats have helped states and school districts invest in evidence-based programs that can help students get back on track. Let's contrast this with my colleagues' response to the pandemic. While Democrats are focused on getting students back to school safely, Republican politicians wanted students in schools regardless of whether it was safe or not. And then we'll have the I told you so back then. While Democrats delivered historic funding to help schools manage the fallout of the pandemic, every Republican lawmaker voted against the American Rescue Plan. Now, as Democrats continue to focus on making up for lost instructional time, Republican politicians are politicizing our classrooms and attacking teachers. Now, that is wrong. We need to stay focused on getting students back to where they would have been if the pandemic had not gotten in the way. And we need to stay focused on delivering sustained funding to K-12 schools, particularly in communities with the greatest need over the long term. Because whatever your politics, surely we can all agree our nation needs its citizens to be well educated during times of emergency and at all times. Finally, I want to conclude with a thank you to teachers across the nation, including in my far-flung district of the Northern Marianas, 14 hours ahead of us. Thank you as you begin your new school year. Thank you for devoting yourselves to the well-being of our nation's students. Your commitment to your students is a lesson to us all, and we're working to make sure you have the resources you need to help your students and their families succeed. I now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Owens of Utah, for the purpose of making an opening statement. Mr. Owens, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The near total shutdown of schools at the beginning of COVID pandemic caused historic disruptions in K-12 education and beyond. At their peak, these closures affected 97% of K-12 students, or approximately 55 million students. It was obvious from the beginning that children were suffering from shuttered classrooms. Despite this, many school districts prolonged school shutdowns, some for months and some for over a year. Other districts waffled back and forth between the two, causing mass uncertainty for educators, students, and parents. Other students have faced continued disruptions to their learning due to restrictive quarantine regulations or stringent masking and vaccine requirements. Majority of the students forced into online education fell behind significantly. According to the most recent National Assessment of Educational Progress report, the average scores for nine-year-olds in 2022 declined 5 points in reading and 7 points in mathematics compared to 2020. This is the biggest drop in reading scores since 1990 and the first ever drop in math. Other analysis found that on average, students were 5 months behind in math, 4 months behind in reading by the end of 2020-2021 academic year. Students kept out of school even longer are faring worse. The numbers are also worse for historically disadvantaged communities. School closures did not only affect students, but also left high schoolers more likely not to graduate or pursue college. These closures didn't only affect academic performance. Many adolescents also faced immense emotional and mental trauma during the pandemic due to forced social isolation. 3 major pediatric organizations last fall declared adolescents' mental health as a national emergency. To help schools reopen, they were given exorbitant amounts of COVID-19 funding with zero accountability measures in place to ensure these taxpayer dollars were spent appropriately. Through ESSER alone, states were giving $190 billion to help schools open safely. On top of this, the science and data from schools had reportedly showed that schools were not the major vector for spread, and few children were at risk of serious illness from COVID-19. Even the Washington Post ran a headline November 20, 2020, stating that schools are not spreading COVID-19. And the Atlantic ran this headline in October of 2020. Schools aren't super spreaders. Fears from the summer appears to have been overblown. Keep in mind, these articles were posted at the end of 2020, 8 or 9 months after the beginning of school closures. Yet many schools did not open. We now know this is because of the immense pressure placed on school boards, school administrators, local politicians, the Biden administration, and even the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention by powerful teacher unions. If it wasn't obvious before, it's obvious now. Teachers' unions have an outsized and unhealthy influence on K-12 education. Multiple studies suggest that union influence affected school operating decisions more than COVID-19 infection rates. This proves that teachers' unions are motivated by politics, not science, and definitely not for the interests of our students and their education. A Los Angeles teachers union, for instance, used the pandemic as an opportunity to push for radical social change. Reports from around the world continue to mount up about the dangers of our children's mental health and learning loss. Instead of addressing these issues, our children are used as hostages, as the teacher unions demanded Medicare for all, outlawing charter schools and defunding the police. Other teacher unions also made demands, and when these demands were met, they moved the goalposts. For example, even after teachers were pushed to the front of the vaccine line, many unions decided to still not reopen schools. Despite this havoc that they wreaked on our educational system, teachers unions have faced no consequence of their actions, nor have the school district officials or Democratic politicians who let them run the show. Republicans demanding accountability. Republicans also demanding answers on how schools have been spending the ESSER funds. Republicans urged patience after the bipartisan second round of COVID relief in December 2020, but the Democrats ignored these warnings and forged ahead with another $120 billion. As a result, we now have some schools that wasted these funds rather than to improve athletics, that is to improve athletics facilities or invite critical race theory consultants to their schools. Congress' allocation of emergency pandemic relief was so excessive that the Wall Street Journal editorialized, Democrats are using the banner of COVID relief not to increase student learning, but to reward Democratic constituency at taxpayers' expense. While Democrats' opposition to the American Rescue Plan has proven correct, we also believe these funds should be used to address students' learning loss now that they have been appropriated. States like Tennessee are leading the way by using taxpayer dollars to address these learning loss that students have experienced. This is an example we should follow. Pandemic policies have failed our students. We must do all we can to right this situation and put our students back on track to success. Thank you, and I'll go back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Owens. Without objection, all other members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, October 4th. Yeah, that's right. I will now introduce our witnesses, and good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome Ms. Phyllis Jordan, who is an Associate Director of Future Ed, a nonpartisan education think tank at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy. Ms. Jordan has researched and written extensively about COVID relief spending, evidence-based practices, and student absenteeism. Before working in education policy, Jordan served in senior editing positions at the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post, where she edited the newspaper's education coverage. Ms. Jordan holds a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri and is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate from Sweetbriar College. Welcome, Ms. Jordan. Dr. Aliha Samuel, I got that right, thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Is President and CEO of CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, and Senior Fellow at the Harvard University Center on the Developing Child. Dr. Samuel previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary, Local, State, and National Engagement at the U.S. Department of Education. She holds an undergraduate degree from Tuskegee University, a master's from the University of Southern Florida, and a specialist and doctorate degree from Nova Southeastern. Welcome, Doctor, again. Thank you for joining us. And Dr. Penny Schwinn, I got the Schwinn, has served as Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Education since February of 2019, when she was selected by Governor Bill Lee. As Commissioner, Dr. Schwinn focuses on accelerating growth through excellence in achievement, empowerment of students and teachers, and engagement of stakeholders. Prior to serving as Commissioner, Dr. Schwinn served as Chief Deputy Commissioner of Academics at the Texas Education Agency. And Dr. Schwinn holds a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Berkeley, a Master of Arts in teaching from Johns Hopkins University, and a PhD in education policy from Claremont Graduate University in California. And welcome, Dr. Schwinn. Thank you for joining us. and Dr. Matthew Bloomstead, all right, was named Commissioner of Education by the Nebraska State Board of Education and began serving as commissioner on January 2nd, 2014. Dr. Bloomstead led the successful development and implementation of a comprehensive state accountability system under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as amended by the Every Vote Students Succeeds Act, ESSA. He was appointed to the Board of Directors of the Council of Chief State School Officers in December 2017 and currently serves as the past president. Dr. Bloomstead earned a PhD in Educational Leadership and Higher Education and a master's degree in Community and Regional Planning from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Welcome, Dr. Bloomstead. We appreciate the witnesses for participating today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written testimony statements and they will appear in full on the hearing record. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, each of you is asked to limit your oral presentation to a 5-minute summary of your written statement. And before you begin your testimony, please remember to unmute your microphone. During your testimony, staff will be keeping track of time and a light will blink when time is up. Well, you have to keep your eye on the timer, whether it's on the platform or here in the committee room on the screen. Please be attentive to the time. Wrap up when your time is over and remute your microphone. Hold on, John. Let me take this off because apparently you're taking my picture. Thank you. If any of you experience technical difficulty during your testimony or later in the hearing, you should stay connected on the platform. Make sure you're muted and use your phone to immediately call the committee's IT director, whose number, again, was provided to you in advance. We will let all the witnesses make their presentations before we move to member questions. When answering questions, please remember to unmute your microphone. The witnesses are aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee, and therefore we will proceed with their testimony. I would like to first recognize Ms. Jordan. Ms. Jordan, please, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much, Chairman Soblin and Ranking Member Owens and members of the committee. I'm really pleased to be here to testify today. My name is Phyllis Jordan. I'm Associate Director at FutureEd, which, as the Chairman said, is a nonprofit think tank at Georgetown and nonpartisan and led by Thomas Tuck. As you both stated, the impact of the pandemic on learning is clear. Test after test shows that students have lost or fallen behind where they should be at this point. The declines are greatest for students who are already struggling in school and those from low-income families, so this is widening achievement gaps. And beyond the academic indicators, we saw absenteeism rise and student engagement fall. Teachers are stressed out and they're stretched thin. There's 3 questions we need to answer about the money that Congress has appropriated to help states and school districts address these challenges. First is, how are they planning to use the unprecedented infusion of federal money to address learning loss? Second, are they spending it effectively? Third, and probably most important, what will the impact be on student achievement? To help answer these questions, FutureEd analyzed trends in ESSER spending plans for 5,000 school districts, educating 74% of the nation's students. Our analysis suggests that at this stage, educational leaders are taking the steps they need to help students gain ground. A substantial body of research points to interventions that can accelerate learning in the months and years ahead, and we've seen these strategies in many spending plans. For instance, about 60% of the local spending plans designate money to extend students' learning time into summer, after school, or both, with about $3.7 billion to be spent in those categories. That number could reach $6.3 billion if trends continue through September 2024. Tutoring is another smart, evidence-based strategy. About 1/3 of districts are putting money toward tutoring and coaching, mostly for math and reading. And when an investment, we expect to reach $3 billion nationwide. Based on what we've seen in these plans, we project that local agencies will spend more than $27 billion of the ESSER III money on academic recovery interventions by September 2024. We project they'll spend another $30 billion on teachers and staff, much of which is going to learning loss priorities like academic coaching and reducing class sizes. And we estimate $26 billion will go toward school facilities and operations, particularly ventilation upgrades. Taken together, these priorities account for about 75% of local education agencies' designated ESSER III spending. with technology and physical and mental health rounding out the total. The local investments come on top of requirements for states to collectively spend at least $1.2 billion in ESSER funds for summer learning, $1.2 billion for after school, and $6 billion more for addressing learning loss. We broke down the spending by school district poverty rates, and we found that places where, with more students in poverty, are prioritizing academic recovery spending for instructional materials like textbooks and new curriculum, while the more affluent districts are focused more on after-school programming and summer learning. Likewise, we found rural districts were more likely to invest in instructional materials and less likely to spend on extended time than their city and suburban counterparts were. When we looked at state partisan lean, we found that nearly the same percentage of districts in red and blue states earmarked ESSER III funds for social emotional learning. Both have made hiring and awarding teachers their top priority, and they plan to spend on similar rates on tutoring. In terms of how the spending is going, the latest data suggests that districts have spent almost all of the money allotted in the CARES Act, which must be obligated by the end of this month. They're well into investing the second round of ESSER, but most haven't spent much of the ARP money. A few things to keep in mind here. Reporting lags behind actual spending. So do district requests for reimbursement from state education agencies, and spending totals don't reflect what's committed for the years ahead. Another challenge is that many districts can't find the people they want to hire. The pandemic has exacerbated longstanding shortages in critical teaching areas like special ed, science, and math. And with many districts hiring more teachers and specialists, there's simply more positions to fill. This is true for tutoring and extended time programs too. At the same time, we're seeing several encouraging trends. First, the infusion of COVID relief dollars has supercharged efforts to train teachers in a phonics-based approach to teaching reading. Second, post-pandemic shortages in federal funding have led more districts to break away from a single teacher pay scale and target dollars for hard-to-fill slots. Third, several states and school districts are developing permanent tutoring infrastructures that could add an important instructional component. Fourth, schools are bringing in mental health professionals and training teachers in social emotional learning to help students navigate their emotions and relationships. A long overdue recognition that emotional well-being plays an important role. Finally, state and districts are using ESSER money to commission research to determine what's working and could spread best practices and guide post-pandemic educational investments. Thank you for the opportunity to share Future Ed's research.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Jordan. We would now like to hear from Dr. Samuel, please. Dr. Samuel, you have 5 minutes. Do you see a timer on your screen? Okay, thank you.
Yes,
5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Sablon, Ranking Member Burgess, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I am Dr. Aaliyah A. Samuel, the President and CEO of the nonpartisan, nonprofit Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, also known as CASEL. I am a former principal, teacher, and a mother of 2 public school children. These experiences equip me to speak firsthand to the urgent need for social and emotional learning to support children's academic recovery and well-being during this critical time. At CASEL, our mission is to make evidence-based social and emotional learning part of a high-quality education from preschool through high school. I also want to underscore CASEL's commitment to academic learning, which is the utmost priority. Social and emotional learning creates the conditions necessary for learning, and decades of research shows that it improves academic achievement, mental wellness, school safety, and healthy behaviors. A review of 213 studies found that social and emotional learning increased reading and math scores by 11 percentile points, and independent studies have been repeatedly replicated similar findings. Another recent study found that social and emotional learning reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety, which so many of our young people are reporting. Students, parents, and educators recognize these benefits. This school year, a survey of district leaders showed that social and emotional learning is a top priority. 80% of parents want schools to continue or expand teaching of social and emotional learning. 84% of teachers say it's more important than ever before. A majority of high school students believe that going to a school focused on social and emotional learning helps them learn academic material. Employer surveys also confirm that strong social and emotional skills are essential to career success. The bottom line, there is a strong evidence and demand for social and emotional learning. We're grateful to Chairman Sablon and this subcommittee for the support provided for evidence-based social and emotional learning, including the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act and the fiscal year 2022 omnibus. Thanks to these efforts, districts and states have been able to invest in social and emotional learning. Despite broad community support, misleading claims and false information is spreading. We have heard from parents and educators across the country who value social and emotional learning, but are being stifled by special interest groups, often from outside of their communities, attempting to counter local control. We can't let political posturing silence the voices of parents and educators who recognize the benefit of social and emotional learning for their children. Social and emotional learning is the process of developing valuable life skills, including understanding and managing emotions, developing empathy, building relationships, and making responsible decisions. These are skills our children need to succeed in their careers and navigate a complex, changing society. Rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, CASEL encourages families and schools to work in partnership to find high-quality programs and approaches that match their local priorities. Many parents and schools have turned to social and emotional learning to make sure that every child is seen, valued, and motivated so that they can learn. In the words of the late researcher, Dr. Roger P. Weisberg, while abundant data provide a firm analytical rebuttal to those who question the need for social and emotional learning or its effectiveness, we should always remember that this movement is all about individual children whose lives hang in the balance behind the data points, waiting for us to open the gates to successful learning. So I want to say unequivocally that politicizing social emotional learning risks what parents and educators know is best for children, what research has shown to be effective, and what the vast majority of parents, educators, and students want in their local schools. Attempts to stifle social emotional learning impair the quality of education that educators can provide in the classroom and threaten schools' efforts to support students' mental, social, and emotional well-being that has only intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic. Congress must commit to continue to do what is right for this generation. Now is the time for us to continue to build up our supports for students and not play politics with our children's lives. We know that social and emotional learning paves the way to a stronger, healthier future for our students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samuel, and thank you for doing very well in your times. I'd now like to turn to Dr. Swin. Dr. Swin, please, you have 5 minutes, and you know when it's 5 minutes gone. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Chairman Sablon, Ranking Member Owens, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Penny Schwinn, Commissioner of Education from the great state of Tennessee. Thank you for inviting me to testify at today's hearing. I appreciate the opportunity to share Tennessee's experience and the incredible work of our districts, educators, families, students, and communities. This is an important moment for our country. How we respond to difficult situations and almost impossible tasks reflects the strength of who we are and what we believe. In Tennessee, we believe that hard work and smart strategy is the formula for continued success. The last few years have been challenging, and I'm exceedingly proud that Tennessee has never wavered in our steadfast commitment to the principles and ideas that have shaped and sustained our education community. States received an extraordinary amount of federal funding to accelerate student achievement. ESSER I provided the resources necessary to address the urgent needs of reopening, which allowed for 97% of our state to return to in-person learning by August of 2020. It was the right thing for our kids and the #1 factor influencing the academic results we now see. ESSER II provided the opportunities for Tennessee to invest in strategies to accelerate student achievement and begin to recover pandemic-related learning loss. Coinciding with ESSER II, our Governor and General Assembly passed the earliest state education recovery legislation in the country, ensuring that the large federal infusion of funding would have lasting impact. ESSER III has been more challenging. Before states and districts had the opportunity to plan for and show results from the first 2 relief packages, they were being asked to strategize on how to spend an unprecedented amount of additional money within a very limited timeline that did not reflect the available supply of resources or an opportunity to make the most effective investment for long-term results. Our department committed to investing those funds thoughtfully and in alignment with our strategic plan, utilizing 3 guiding principles. First, prioritize and incentivize what will benefit all students, especially those with the most need. Second, make evidence-based investments with the mindset of sustainable impact. And third, measure and report on the effectiveness of those funds. To implement these principles, we focused on early literacy. The department launched Reading 360, a comprehensive approach to the science of reading available to every district, school, family, and partner in the state. The General Assembly passed the Tennessee Literacy Success Act, which codified the use of phonics and high-quality instructional materials in teaching a child to read. Both parents and educators were part of the process, helped design the strategy, and are our most important stakeholders. The outcomes have been clear. Tennessee recently posted English language arts results that have largely returned to pre-pandemic levels and in many cases exceeded the strongest scores the state has seen in the last 5 or more years. We also prioritized accelerating academic achievement for all students. As part of the Tennessee Learning Loss and Student Acceleration Act, Tennessee launched extensive summer programming, serving nearly 1 out of every 4 elementary school students. The department also launched a state tutoring corps, which funds and supports high-dosage, low-ratio tutoring for over 200,000 students through district and community grants, family micro-grants, and on-demand tutoring. To incentivize investments in student achievement, the department provided additional resources for those districts who both participated in tutoring and invested at least half of their ESSER III funds towards academics. We're expanding the educator pipeline. Tennessee's Grow Your Own strategy provides a strong and sustainable teacher pipeline. For the first time in over a decade, the University of Tennessee's enrollment in educator preparation programs is increasing, and the state has funded enough slots to fill half of existing vacancies. Tennessee became the first state in the country to make teaching a federally approved apprenticeable profession so that aspiring educators can now become a teacher for free as they are paid to do so. In closing, we had the opportunity to emerge stronger and more strategic than ever before. We've heard talk of bold action, read papers about what is possible, and dreamed of what could be true for our students, our teachers, and our schools. The challenge I offer to all of us is that we turn the possibility into the reality. Make bold action for kids the expectation, not the exception. For us, bold action means a comprehensive literacy strategy and the largest tutoring program in the country. Innovation means rethinking what high school can look like to accelerate post-secondary attainment. Accountability means publicly reporting on every dollar spent and evaluating the return on those investments. Reimagination means overhauling our 30-year-old formula to sustain proven investments made over the last 3 years. I am inspired by the work in Tennessee schools, encouraged by the pace of our progress, and energized by the urgency with which we move forward. The pandemic was a pivotal moment in education, but what we do now has the power to define our field and our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swin. And finally, sir, we'll hear from Dr. Blumstead. I'm sorry. Please, you have 5 minutes, doctor.
Yes,
Thank you.
Chairman Sablon, Ranking Member Owens, and members of the subcommittee. I am Matt Blumstead. I'm the Commissioner of Education in the state of Nebraska. I'm proud to be here to represent all of the great work that's taken place. I find myself both humbled and proud at the same moment in time to be here and represent Nebraska. I want to highlight the importance of federal pandemic investments for Nebraska's pandemic journey. A special thank you is in order for the congressional foresight to act throughout the pandemic and project the current and future needs of students, families, teachers, schools, and communities. The initial elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, CARES, that funding set forth a path for us to allow us to open schools in the fall of 2020 and invested in the planning and initial infrastructure that helped Nebraska walk boldly through the first wave of the pandemic. However, by late fall of 2020, the challenges facing our schools were increasingly complicated. The eventual passage of ESSER II bolstered the educational infrastructure and supports necessary to sustain in-person schooling while meeting the disruptions of staff shortages, situational closures, and the safety protocols that included regular quarantine and isolation of students and staff. Academic, social, and emotional tolls mounted, but most educators had little additional capacity to manage much more than the crisis directly upon their schools. With the passage of the American Rescue Plan, ESSER III, the historic investments of the funds has further set schools on a path to address unfinished teaching and learning and the non-academic effects to students. In Nebraska's case, the passage of ARP allowed state and local leaders to invest in addressing the multiple impacts already realized. It also allowed capacity to counteract the ongoing challenges that are now measurable. As this school year commences, I see several challenging trends exacerbated during the pandemic. Strikingly, chronic absenteeism in Nebraska increased by about 70%, from 45,000 pre-pandemic to over 77,000. Also, the math achievement gap between English learners and all students increased by 5 percentage points on the statewide assessments. Pandemic impacts, coupled with ongoing and pre-existing achievement gaps across race, ethnicity, poverty, and special needs, had an impact in Nebraska commensurate with preliminary numbers from NAEP. Knowing the likelihood of such academic challenges, the Nebraska Department of Education established a framework for school renewal and acceleration in the spring of 2021 that helped us focus ESSER II and ESSER III funds on the critical mindset shift from learning loss to unfinished learning, from recovery to renewal, and from remediation to acceleration. We created professional learning opportunities for school and district teams to operationalize the framework and target their allocations to address unfinished teaching and learning. This framework was the foundation for a budget roadmap tool that engaged schools and stakeholders in meaningful dialogue about planning for ARP funding. The roadmap provided direction for schools to properly engage with students, families, and the community writ large. At the state level, we sought to model these engagements in our own work and conducted surveys, held focus groups, and identified key constituents. The roadmap guided schools to create a theory of action and use several key strategies aligned with known evidence-based interventions in their district plans. Like academic impacts, we anticipated substantial family and student impacts on social, emotional, and mental health. This seemed to hit a disruptive peak in schools last year. Fortunately, this year has started with much more reason for optimism so far this fall. I am hearing that schools believe behavior concerns that were markedly up in 21-22 have seemed to have waned in comparison now. I believe this is a product of increased attention to social emotional needs of students coupled with resources that schools have implemented during the pandemic. Nebraska used the American Rescue Plan state set-aside investments in part for mental and behavioral health supports for students, teachers, and staff. The investment in mental health has been in partnership with key nonprofits and Nebraska's intermediate agencies to scale and regionalize supports accessible to schools. I also note that local optimism has increased. Teachers and students alike seem more engaged. This will all take further study, but I remain optimistic this apparent trend holds across Nebraska's school settings. Though I have heard concerns of schools and states' ability to spend down resources, Nebraska has encouraged school plans that meet local needs and state processes in accord with federal expectations. I know that schools are also working to meet deadlines on proposed investments and projects. Regardless of accounting timelines, Nebraska endeavors to invest and target funds where they are most needed. We are just beginning to see the fruits of those investments and will continue to measure progress in the year ahead. In closing, I am proud about how Nebraska educators and students managed in these times. As we addressed the difficulties and met the challenges in the first full school year of the pandemic, a false sense of normal was established. Schools entered the 21-22 year to a difficult set of circumstances as the pandemic intensified and disrupted education further for a third year in a row. As we start the 22-23 school year this fall, I am personally grateful for the investments made through the American Rescue Plan, as this will be the opportunity to not simply restore normal, but to manage through the remainder of the pandemic and grow out of this crisis to establish a better future. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Dr. Blumstead, and thank you to all the witnesses for sharing your testimony, your thoughts with us. Under Committee Rule 9A, we will not question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I will be recognizing subcommittee members in seniority order. Again, to ensure that members' 5 minutes rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time, and the timer will show a blinking light when time has expired. But please be attentive to the time wrap-up when your time is over, and remute your microphone. Before turning to my questions, I'd like to first, just for the record, address, that Mr. Owens is the ranking member of the subcommittee. I think one of us may have inadvertently said he was Mr. Burgess. So. But, and another thing, let's be clear. Everybody wants school open. However, Democrats want schools to open and operate safely, while my Republican colleagues wanted to prematurely open schools, regardless of if it was safe or not. This is particularly alarming as COVID-19 poses a significant risk to students, teachers, and families. And I should know, I have 2 teachers in my household. COVID-19 was one of the leading causes of pediatric death in 2020. As of July 14, 2022, at least 1,300 active and retired K-12 educators and personnel have died of COVID-19. Of those, 449 were active teachers. All of those teachers could have been mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, teachers. I mean, just they had lives and families. So we should be careful to ensure states and school districts could reopen to the public health crisis and reopen and stay open safely. Democrats passed the American Rescue Plan, which delivered the largest one-time investment in K-12 schools. And thanks to these investments, nearly all schools are open for in-person learning. So let me ask my question. Dr. Blomstead, sir. States must reserve 5% of ARP ESSER funds to address learning loss by implementing evidence-based interventions that respond to social, emotional, and academic needs. I think the timer should be on for, okay, it is. States are also required to reserve 1% of ARP ESSER funds for summer enrichment and 1% of funds for out-of-school time programming. So, Doctor, let me ask, how is Nebraska using these reservations to address learning loss?
Yeah, and thank you, Chairman Sablon. The reality for Nebraska is we really, as we worked with our schools to build plans, we did 2 different things. On our state set-aside piece, we really looked to the set of partners that could help us with student engagement, student and family engagement. We worked with a partner called the Nebraska Children and Families Foundation that actually helped us build capacity. It was hard to find the immediate capacity to do that particular work, and we actually established both academic supports in that setting as well as our mental health supports as well, and really building that out statewide to give schools capacity and resources that they could connect with and tie that into their plans and their particular work. We've seen schools take that up, including trying to secure licensed mental health practitioners to be part of the school setting to ensure that teachers are prepared and trained to be supported as well as support their students. Okay. So we've done both.
All right, and how are you ensuring that interventions are targeted to student groups most impacted by the pandemic, such as students of color, students from low-income families, students with disabilities, and in English learners, all 4 of which I qualify?
Yeah, we actually did a unique thing where we mapped across the state, looked at various social impacts that were already existing within our population, and then actually highlighted our schools that were identified underneath the federal accountability for targeted support and improvement and comprehensive support and improvement, and began to target resources from a state level as well as further assist those schools in their planning so we could target to the right students.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Blomstead, the teacher shortage is disproportionately impacting students with disabilities. For example, in Omaha, here in Nebraska, the largest school district in Nebraska, the majority of unfilled teaching positions are in special ed. I have a son who is in special ed too. News reports indicate that as of the end of August, at the elementary school level, 77 teaching positions remained open, and 63 of these were special education or support jobs. At the secondary level, there were 75 unfilled teaching positions, including 66 special education jobs. So can you discuss how school districts in Nebraska are using ARP or other federal funds to address this issue? And what more needs to be done to ensure students with disabilities have the qualified teachers and staff they need to ensure they receive a free and appropriate public education, appropriate for America, sir?
Yeah, and I would say in Nebraska, and probably true across the country, that even pre-pandemic, there were shortages of special ed teachers for those environments. What we've really focused in on is how can we help teachers come from a lot of different pathways, and we've had legislation passed in Nebraska that allows us to be able to change that. We are using ARP funds to actually recruit and retain teachers in a variety of ways. Our schools are thinking about different strategies that do that, and I'm really excited to be able to try to recruit teachers with our 16 teacher preparation institutions, and we're really looking for first-generation students. We're looking for the opportunity to move students into those special needs arenas as well.
Yeah, thank you. And one of my first impressions of the United States of America happens to be Nebraska. So many of our young ladies who go to school for nuns, they go to Nebraska, and they come back and, hey, you've been back in education. And many of them are still with us today, very good people. So thank you, Dr. Bloomstead. I will add just, Dr. Swin, maybe to a little degree, a less degree, we have something in my district that support where teachers are actually, our individuals are actually paid to go to school and teach at the same time. So, and that's a program that works for us. We're teacher shortage. So my 5 minutes is overdue. I now recognize Mr. Owens, the ranking member, for the purpose of questioning the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Swin, in your written statement, you talked about the high percentage of schools that were open for in-person instruction in the fall of 2020. Of those who weren't, do you believe those continued closures increased the harm done to disadvantaged students?
So the majority of schools in Tennessee, 97% were open going into the 2021 school year. All of our schools offered in-person instruction by March 8th of 2021. When we look at the academic achievement data as well as other indicators such as behavior referrals, et cetera, we do see that those schools that were open from the start of the year, and that is across urban, suburban, and rural environments, those students did perform better. A great example for us is in Chattanooga, Hamilton County. Those students saw achievement that was actually higher than pre-pandemic levels, and that cross groups, including economically disadvantaged students and students with disabilities.
Okay. I'm going to continue to ask you. One of the strategies discussed in your testimony on the focus of early literacy, you mentioned specifically the state's Literacy Success Acts, codified the use of phonics. Can you explain more about why that matters and the harm done to children as we back away from phonics?
Absolutely. So phonics-based instruction, systematic phonics-based instruction in the science of reading is pivotal and I would say completely research-based and absolutely essential to teach a child to read. I think especially for those students who have trouble learning to read, students with characteristics of dyslexia, et cetera. In Tennessee, we've taken a very hard approach because we know when students are not on grade level in reading by 3rd grade, they are 4 times more likely to drop out. Those who are reading on grade level are much more likely to have long-term success in both income, socioeconomic success, as well as health outcomes. And so having a phonics first approach certainly is research-based. It helps those students to understand the science of how to put together sounds and words in order to understand what they're reading. And I would also say that knowledge-based curriculum in terms of supporting the knowledge that goes into learning to read is going to be incredibly important. We're very excited about our results, and certainly they speak for themselves.
Thank you for that. My final question is more of a general one. As you acknowledged in your testimony, the last round of the COVID funding might not have been quite necessary, or at the very least, we owed it to the federal taxpayers to take a more strategic approach on any third round of COVID aid. At the same time, we want states and school districts to use the funding already received in a strategic way to address the students' learning loss. Can you talk more about the steps you're taking at the state level for holding school districts accountable for using those funds wisely, and why this approach does not seem to be the norm across the country?
Sure. So I'll talk about a couple of things, certainly what we did in terms of the process. First and foremost, we used a standard template for all of our districts. That allowed for comparability for the public, the General Assembly, and others to be able to understand how are our districts investing their funds. We align that to high-quality academics, student readiness and supports, and then certainly the educator pipeline and supporting our great professionals in our public school systems. Second is we proactively worked with our state comptroller's office and our auditor. We wanted to make sure that we were thinking about how schools would be held accountable on the back end to set them up for success on the front end. Having those early conversations was really important, especially for fiscal responsibility and management. And then to complement that, we offered grants to districts, and those grants to districts provided additional pre-auditing support for them, pre-monitoring support, so they could start to look at exactly how they needed to organize information and data and ensure that the spending was aligned to best practice and what was going to help students. The last thing that we did is we encouraged all of our districts to use at least 1% of their funding for areas that would allow for data collection, making sure data was valid, and some of their internal monitoring and support, again, to ensure that we saw appropriate spending. And then what we're doing now is really looking at the returns on those investments. So our strong investments in literacy, in high-dosage tutoring, effective high school programs and CTE programs, and then certainly our students who have struggled the most, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and English learners, ensuring that those investments are actually working for kids. I think that strategy put together, along with the public transparency, has been pivotal in the state of Tennessee.
Very good. For someone who has parents who are very invested in teaching, my dad was a college professor for 40 years. My mom was a high school teacher. So I know what it is to have teachers who love this profession. And I look forward as we get into 2023, having some really good conversations with all the states that are really winning out, very, very innovative, and making sure we not only bring the best into this profession, but keep the best. So thank you so much for your efforts. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
I yield back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Owens. Now I'd like to recognize one of our Teacher of the Year also, Ms. Johanna Hayes of Connecticut. You're next. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Sablon, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. The pandemic has adversely affected our entire education environment, from students and teachers to parents and caregivers. But I remind people we had a global pandemic, and we made choices to save lives. Oftentimes we hear about the number of children who died from the pandemic, and that number is, thank God, low. But of the million people who died during this time, those were parents and grandparents and community members of these children. So people who don't weigh that into the equation really have a lack of understanding or appreciation for how students learn. In my state of Connecticut, we saw declines in student performance and achievement due to COVID-19, particularly amongst high-need students, much like most other people in the nation. However, in 2021 and 2022, academic growth results show that students grew slightly faster than they did in the 2018-19 school year, an encouraging sign of learning acceleration as schools emerge from this pandemic using American Rescue Plan Act funds. The Connecticut State Department of Education is leading the way in social and emotional learning, making tools available to districts at no cost, engaging parents and teachers with resources to support social emotional learning, recruiting teachers, and all of the challenges that have arisen during the pandemic. But too often, social and emotional learning is seen as separate from academics. However, building strong relationships with students and creating opportunities to develop cognitive skills is critical to learning. That's how kids learn. I have to tell you, I have a 14-year-old son who was in 6th grade when this pandemic started. He went to virtual, then went to completely hybrid. Last year, they touched the ground and it was touch and go because school would open, close whenever there was an outbreak. So he entered this year as a 9th grader, having very little experience in the middle school. So I worry about what that means and how we support that learning, because I know what it takes for a kid to be on green, ready to learn as a 9th grader in high school. And that's why the resources that we put in place, the wraparound services, are so critical to student learning. It is not just about the geography of a school building for kids to learn. And that is what I've heard over and over and over again. But again, I have to stress that we had a global pandemic, the likes of something we have never seen before, something that no educator, no parent, no professional could have ever been prepared for, something that even the Teacher of the Year had never heard of happening. So this idea that we made flippant choices and made a decision to close down schools is completely flawed. I challenge anyone on this committee to say that they care about children of this profession as much as more than me. You know, we all care about children, we all care about their well-being, we all want them to have an opportunity for success, and we all should be invested in solutions to make sure that we close these gaps. I've used way too much of my time on that, so I will try to get in one question. Dr. Samuel, given what you know about the relationships between SEL and academic growth, do you expect that students taught using these methods will close the learning gaps faster than students who are not?
Thank you for the question. And I just want to be clear, social and emotional learning paves the way for academic learning. I want to turn to a comment that Dr. Bloomstead made about chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is not just a challenge in Nebraska, but we're seeing it nationwide. Over 22% of our children are being marked chronically absent because they're not engaged. And when we talk about social and emotional learning skills, those are the skills that can help bring our kids back. It's powerful relationships. It's having the confidence to learn. As we've talked to parents from across the nation, they're not only concerned about the academics, they're concerned about their kids feeling like they belong, feeling like they're able to focus and stay motivated, how to reduce their kids' stress and anxiety, And those are some of the reasons why kids are not only missing school, but if they're in school, they're not learning because they're not emotionally or socially present. And so we have to understand that we cannot bifurcate the two right now. We can't separate social emotional learning and academics. We have to ensure that they're integrated. I myself am also a former principal and educator. My boys started the pandemic at kindergarten and in third grade. And right now I'm seeing the transition for even both of them academically and the important role that social emotional learning plays to make sure that kids can recognize their frustration, identify strategies to not only manage those frustrations, but also have the confidence to ask for help. And those are all skills that kids need in order to recover academics.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The gentle lady yields. I now like to call Mr. Allen of Georgia. Mr. Allen, 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. We talked about it. Many students across the United States are facing long-term effects from not being in the classroom, namely learning loss and even social skills that need to be improved, like how to interact with other students, teachers in the classroom. My district includes rural parts of Georgia, and I've heard stories about the effects of learning loss due to many counties not having access to rural broadband during that critical time in 2020. And I tell you, all the money this federal government has spent in the last 3 years to deal with COVID, and we still don't have fiber optic to every home in America is shameful. Luckily, in my home state of Georgia, our governor reopened the state early under much criticism. And in fact, July 2020, I originally introduced the Education Flexibility for Families Act to require schools to provide an option for every parent. And and that option was for in-person learning to receive, and we needed the funding to make sure that happened. Unfortunately, Teachers Union played a large role in shaping guidance, and I believe that the Teachers Union, they did not endorse what I was trying to do to give the parents and the children those options, and they prioritized politics over our students. Dr. Swin, what are the best practices that you have seen that other school districts could implement to fill the gap in students' education and life skills? And moving forward, how could we ensure that teachers' unions truly do have the students' best interest at heart?
Thank you, sir. So one of the things that I am probably the most proud of in the state of Tennessee are our incredible teachers. They have stepped up in a way that I think is not just impressive, but historic. And so when we think about high-dosage tutoring, 200,000 seats that we will be filling, we don't have the same vacancies because our teachers are working before school, after school, and restructuring daily schedules to step up for their kids. We are also seeing, in terms of our summer programming, like I said, 1 in 4 elementary school students is served in summer school in Tennessee, 1 in 5 middle school students. We also saw the same thing where our teachers were stepping up and participating in summer school where we didn't have the vacancies. It's important that we compensated them for that work, that we respected them as professionals, and certainly brought them into the co-planning that exists in all of our work, including early literacy. I think continuing that work is going to be incredibly important as we fill shortages and move students forward.
Right. You said in your testimony the importance of transparency in the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funding, ESSER. In 2021, Georgia launched a dashboard to allow the public to see how school districts in Georgia are using their COVID-19 funding. And transparency and accountability are critical to ensure every dollar is spent in a meaningful way. What are some of the best practices you saw in accountability with the funding in Tennessee that other states and districts could follow?
So certainly I want to commend Georgia because I think we took a similar approach. Right now we have a website that tracks school models, absenteeism. You can see every single community engagement plan as well as ESSER plan. The other thing that we've done is we are a reimbursement state. So we now are requiring every district to provide documentation for every dollar spent. All of those expenditures are publicly available, as well as the breakdown of how funds are being spent. We are doing program evaluations for every district in terms of the return on those investments.
Okay, and finally, we have just a little over a minute. You discussed bold action you feel needs to be taken for our students. I had a superintendent, we have an inner city school there in Augusta, which in my district, and I said, so what are you doing to improve, the school system? He said, well, I'm working on improving parents. He said they play a critical role, but you said that needs to be bold action. Sometimes I've been a long time advocate for school choice, or, okay, we know we got a problem. We lag behind the world here. And so we got 36 seconds. What can we do to motivate children to perform like we know they can perform in this country?
Yes, so I'll answer this both as a mom of 3 young students as well as a commissioner. And I think the best thing we can do is hold high expectations for our students and encourage them to meet those expectations. I hope all 3 of my kids are teachers. That's my big dream for them. But I think what we're seeing is that when we challenge our students to be excellent, when we give them the supports they need to do so, in whatever that means, and that's all of our students, we are seeing our students rise to those expectations, and we're seeing the people who deeply care about them in our school systems also do whatever it takes to ensure our children can thrive. And I think that's special about Tennessee and a lot of states in our country.
All right, well, thank you so much. Go Georgia Bulldogs, and I yield back. Sorry about that, Tennessee.
Yeah, and actually, she's also a bear, I understand, so. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Allen. Let me now, Ms. Wilson. Ms. Wilson, is for questioning, you have 5 minutes if you unmute, and thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Sablon, Ranking Member Owens, thank you so much for today's hearing. Before I begin, let me say congratulations and thank our teachers for bringing our children safely through the pandemic. What would we have done had it not been such a wonderful teaching force across this nation? They stepped in with very little training, learned how to Zoom, taught children how to Zoom, kept them on notice, communicated with parents, woke up every morning. And remember, these teachers also had their personal children in their homes Zooming as they were teaching on Zoom to hundreds of children across the nation. So we cannot forget the sacrifice that our teachers made during the pandemic. Because of them, this nation is in order and stayed in order during the pandemic. So I just wanted to say that. I come from one of the largest and most diverse school districts in the United States, where 90% of students come from a racially minoritized community. And so this is extremely important for me and how we manage. I want to ask Dr. Samuel, what are some of the best strategies for addressing students' social, emotional, and academic needs? Could you please share some bright spots from states or districts that have employed these strategies effectively?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think first I want to underscore that social and emotional learning is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but is really tailored to each community. And really there's a couple of primary strategies that I want to just elevate because they're often used together. One is the emphasis and focus on relationship building. 2, teaching those skills explicitly and giving an opportunity for kids and kids to practice these skills and the adults to model the skills. And 3, the time for collaboration and reflecting during academic lessons. And so it can look different ways. For example, relationship building, that's where there's an activity where students can talk about their ideas and actually bring in other voices and think collaboratively and work together. when we talk about explicit instruction, that's where the teacher can actually guide their students in practicing their social awareness and their relationship skills. And then as we talk about the integration into academics, for example, if there is a science lesson, students can have time to collaborate in small groups and practice the skills that are not only discussed and talked about explicitly during the day, but then also during that instructional time. And I think one of the examples I'd like to bring up is in Washoe County, Nevada, where they've implemented a program called Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, or PBIS, to really improve the school climate and student outcomes. And they have seen a dramatic increase of almost 20% in graduation rates. Also in Dallas, they integrated SEL across academic instruction, family engagement, their professional development, and school climate. And they have seen a dramatic increase in students responding that they have a more positive view of school because of those supportive relationship and social awareness. And they've also had a decrease in suspension. So we see holistically across the US, different examples of how social emotional learning is being used to not only improve academics, but also improve school climate and culture, which we know are so important for student engagement.
Thank you so much. This question is for Ms. Jordan. I hope we have time. Black students who have a Black teacher for at least 1 year in elementary school are less likely to drop out of high school and more likely to consider college. How can states and districts best leverage COVID relief funds to diversify their education for workforce?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. We're seeing a lot of states and some districts developing grow your own programs, which is bringing teachers who using after-school workers or paraprofessionals, teachers' aides, and helping them develop the skills they need and the education they need to become teachers. And we feel like this is a good strategy because it's putting people who are already in the community into teaching positions. And a lot of times these are diverse teachers, Black and Latino, and can really help students in the ways you're describing.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Now let me recognize, please, Mr. Keller. Mr. Keller, you have 5 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As it becomes clear just how devastating pandemic-related learning loss was on students, we need to be making sure that the government is using taxpayer dollars wisely and not making matters even worse for our students. Yet, through the American Rescue Plan, the federal government spent $190 billion on the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund to help schools reopen, and most of these funds have yet to be spent. Meanwhile, students are now back in the classroom, raising concerns that the American Rescue Plan wasn't really about helping our students succeed and more of an effort to bolster teachers' unions and President Biden's allies. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress Report, reading and math scores declined at unacceptable levels during the pandemic. The National Assessment and Educational Progress data suggests that students saw an average 5-point decline in reading and a 7-point decline in math during the same time frame. Dr. Schwinn, one, thank you for being here. I appreciate the witnesses all being here. But Dr. Schwinn, from your experience with pandemic-related school reopening policy in Tennessee, can you tell us about balancing students' access to in-person education with the need to emphasize local solutions to various challenges?
Thank you for that question, and I think that gets to the core of the approach in Tennessee. It has certainly been that locals know what's best in their local communities, and it is the responsibility of the state to help to support those local decisions. What we saw in the state of Tennessee, again, is that the vast majority of schools were back in person and at minimum hybrid throughout the 2020-21 school year. As a result, they were able to invest the dollars that did come in on specific strategies and practices that were going to support their students moving forward and to thrive. And we've seen the academic results much quicker recovery than I think was projected, and certainly we are at pre-pandemic levels in English language arts. What I would say is really important about that is it's providing folks with the tools they need to make those really informed decisions, and then allowing, again, local communities to make the choices that are best fit for what they think is best for their students.
But how did you in Tennessee make those decisions so much better than other states or other educational school districts and so on? How were you able to make those decisions so much better and benefit your students than other parts of the country? What did you do differently?
So I think part of it comes down to we have exceptional educators, district leaders, General Assembly, governor, community organizations that were all hyper-focused on what is best for kids, looking at the data, and figuring out what those trade-offs would be. I think the other part of that is that we knew that for people to feel comfortable coming back, we had to make sure they had the resources. So the governor used most of his federal relief pot to ensure that there was on-demand PPE for schools and staff who felt like they needed it. We had devices that were provided to all schools at no cost so that students were able to move back and forth as they saw fit. But what we also had was a consolidated strategic plan to focus on academic student readiness and our exceptional teachers and educators in the state so that the resources were really targeted to what we knew was going to move our school systems forward and support student academic acceleration from the start. And that, again, we made some announcements in March through June of 2020 about tutoring, summer school, and other programs that we knew would be essential, and we did not waver from that plan.
And not every state did that then, I guess is what you're telling me.
Other states made different choices, but that was certainly what we thought was incredibly important in the state of Tennessee.
And the results you saw in Tennessee prove out that you made the right decision.
I would say so. Back to pre-pandemic levels in English language arts and 40% recovered in math. We expect to be fully recovered this school year.
I would hope that people in other states would take that as a lesson and follow your example. Just another thing, Dr. Schwinn, on the learning loss numbers that I mentioned earlier. How might we reverse some of these troubling trends and prevent students from falling farther behind?
So I think the number one most beneficial thing that we've really done outside of our early literacy work, which I'm very proud of, is high-dosage tutoring. Again, that's over 200,000 students will have the benefit of that high-dosage tutoring. It's the largest state program in the country. And when we look at the data for those districts who implemented with fidelity and high quality that high-dosage tutoring, what we saw is that they increased at a substantially higher rate across student groups than those districts that did not. And what we heard from one principal, it's our Tennessee All-Core Month this month. What we heard from one principal is they said, if we do nothing else in this state, we must continue high-dosage tutoring forevermore. It is a game changer for our kids, and it is one of the most important things we've invested in as a state.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I yield
sir.
back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keller. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Scott, the chairman of the full committee. Mr. Scott, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jordan, we just heard a complaint that a lot of the money hasn't been spent. And I think I heard in your testimony there's a difference between allocation or commitment and actually spending. If you hire a counselor today on a 3-year contract, is there a difference between the time you would call the money committed or allocated and the time it would be reported as spent?
That's exactly right. Thank you, Chairman Scott. What we're seeing, a significant amount of money has been spent. There is still a lot left to spend, but what we see in these plans is a lot of detail budgeting out for, these plans were submitted a year ago, budgeting out for 3 years. So if you're using that to hire a teacher or a tutor, you've only spent a fraction of that money. That doesn't mean you don't know what to do with it or you don't have plans for it. It just means it hasn't been spent. There's also a process, Commissioner Schwinn was talking about, where the districts spend money and then they seek reimbursement for the states. So the amount of money that we know has been spent lags behind what has actually been spent. But, there were some districts that don't have much detail, but I was surprised by the level of detail that districts have put into these plans and and the forethought to have different positions for 2 to 3 years out. hence the spending will continue for 2 to 3 years out.
Thank you. Dr. Samuel, many children have experienced adverse childhood experiences during the pandemic. Those experiences have been highly correlated with future problems. Can you tell me what kinds of experiences like this occurred during the pandemic and how social and emotional learning can help?
Yes, we know many children experience trauma of a variety of ways. And one of the things we know about social emotional learning is that it creates many protective factors for our kids who have experienced trauma. One of the things we have seen in districts that have had high quality SEL implemented in their district, even pre-pandemic, those students came back already having stronger relationships. And so they had someone within the school building that they could have a conversation with about what they were feeling, how it was impacting their learning. And one of the things we know is that educators who have really strong relationships with their students, not only do those students perform better, but they are more likely to have lower incidences of discipline and also higher expectations. And that's one of the things Dr. Schwinn also mentioned that she wants for her children, and I know I want for mine. We want for all of our kids. So ensuring that those high expectations are there for kids, for kids who have experienced trauma, those on-site building relationships are truly key.
Thank you. Mr. Blumstead, Dr. Blumstead, can you tell me how in dealing with teacher shortages, there's a lot of innovative strategies used to accelerate credentials. How do you make sure that those with the accelerated credentials don't all end up in schools disproportionately attended by minorities and low income?
Yeah, and thank you. I should call you Chairman Scott in a different setting. So Congressman Scott, thank you for the question. The reality for the circumstances of trying to ensure that, number one, we really hit a shortage not just because of the pandemic, but we had certain shortage areas already. We were looking in Nebraska about how we can actually create alternative pathways for folks. We were looking at barriers for folks entering the teaching profession as well. And trying to bring all those things together has been really an important part of that. We've been working with our teacher prep institutions about new strategies. We learned from our colleagues in states. Tennessee's done some great things as well. Thinking about how we can bring teachers in the profession and support them, mentorships and other things that bring them into the profession as well. Ensuring that we can bring teachers ultimately to make sure that our high poverty areas, our diverse populations are represented as part of that strategy is also key and important. And thinking of key supports that we can do at a state level as well as at a district level has been part of that for us. And we've implemented quite a few of those.
How do you make sure that all of these people with what could be described as lesser credentials don't all end up disproportionately at certain schools?
So we'll continue to track that in Nebraska. We maintain a very high expectation that we would see teachers with high levels of credentials in all areas, and so we'll track that in kind of our accounting of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Scott. Let me now recognize Mr. Groffman, please. Mr. Groffman? Okay. 5 minutes, sir. Thank you.
My question is for Dr. Schwinn. In Wisconsin, we've spent about 2.5% of the American Rescue Act dollars so far. We had $1.5 billion, at least those are the numbers I've been given. And usually, there's no shortage of people in the education system who want to spend dollars on something or other. So it's kind of shocking that over a year after that bill passed, so little is actually, they found something to spend it on. Could you compare that to your experience in Tennessee or what you hear in other parts of the country?
Sure, so I can speak to the state of Tennessee. What we've certainly looked at is tracking how much we would expect districts to have spent by now, as well as kind of their obligation plans. And so right now, we would expect that the total amount of federal funding should be somewhere between 30 to 40% spent based on when the funds were received and the rate of going through procurement processes, et cetera. We are on track to have that level of spending across our districts. I will say that one of the things that we do is we meet with our superintendents regularly. I meet with about, myself or a person on my cabinet will meet with superintendents in every single district once a month. For a significant period of time. We have Wednesday calls to talk about the tracking of spending, and then we certainly have our regional offices who work with districts on those investment strategies.
Do you feel in Tennessee and the country as a whole that we are paying enough attention to what I'll call, in the high school realm primarily, skills-based education? I mean, there's so many jobs out there that would pay $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 if you went into an apprenticeship right out of high school or began to have more what used to be called shop class in high school. Do you feel these things have been adequately funded, or are we spending too much time on things that maybe cannot be translated into something practical?
In Tennessee, we are focused on the high school experience. So our General Assembly and Governor Lee's proposed budget allocated $1 million to every high school and $500,000 to every middle school to redesign the experience so it is more aligned to an actual job or post-secondary attainment after high school. What that's now allowing is for every single high school and middle school in the state to have aligned programs of study and CTE programs that will ensure that students are not only ready for a post-secondary degree or credential, but some of them can go straight into workforce. And actually, during the pandemic, we more than doubled our STEM-designated schools and had the highest level of work-based learning and apprenticeship participation that we've ever had in our state.
In your experience, are too many people in this country going to a four-year university or college setting?
I think that we need to reevaluate the conversation and really align it to the jobs that our children want after they graduate from high school, and that may not be college. And so I think for us, we're really focusing on the professional aspirations of our students and creating programs of study that meet those goals.
Do you think right now we're sending too many kids, or there's too much emphasis on a four-year college or university situation?
I do. I think we have to broaden the discussion for all of our students.
Okay, next question. One of the things that bothers me, I guess first of all, I want you to respond to what I think an ideal world would be. Wisconsin is, like many states politically, about 50-50, right down the middle. People win or lose with 51-49%. And I would think, therefore, particularly on the high school level where you get more ideological, you should probably have about 50% of the, say, history teachers lean Republican, 50% Democrat. Nevertheless, at least in Wisconsin, I'm hearing, a lot of emphasis on a certain worldview on LGBTQ, equity warriors, racially biased or critical race theory, that sort of thing, sometimes to a scary degree. Do you think the ideological bent of some education professionals is twisting the curriculum in high schools away from what would be right down the middle of where the American public is?
So I think in speaking with the superintendents in our state, we teach the state standards. That is the responsibility of our educators, and it is the thing that we as a state agency and our districts are focused on. Our General Assembly did recently pass a Prohibited Concepts Materials Act in the last several years, and that does provide additional guidance for districts in terms of the expectations. But I will say that we are hyper-focused and steadfast on teaching the state standards as approved by the State Board of Education.
You're confident we have no critical race theory or LGBTQ cultural competency curriculum in Tennessee?
We have a process by which if a community member, parent, et cetera, identifies something that they determine to be problematic, they deal with that at the local level and appeal that to the state. We have not yet had something appealed to the state that has been validated as of now.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Groffman. Now I'd like to call on Ms. McBath for 5 minutes of questioning, please.
Thank you so much. And first, I'd like to say thank you to Chairman Scott and thank you to you, Subcommittee Chair Sablan. Thank you for hosting this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to speak before the committee about our nation's students, which we all really are quite concerned about. No family in the greatest country in the world should ever be forced to choose between being able to pay their rent or their mortgage and putting healthy, nutritious food on the table for their children. And as I've said before this committee before, no child, regardless of the zip code that they live in or the state that they're born into, should have to face the pain that comes with going hungry. So no child should have to bear the emotional burden, the anxiety, and the stress that comes with not knowing where their next meal might come from, or whether they're going to be eating 3 meals a day when summer vacation comes around and they no longer have access to school breakfast on the lunch line. And on July 27th, this committee advanced H.R. 8540, also known as the Healthy Meals, Healthy Kids Act, to address and prevent the very real and solvable crisis of child hunger in America. This legislation would reauthorize and update federal child nutrition programs by expanding access to and investing in school meal programs and modernizing the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, and we know it as WIC. It would address our summer food insecurity and improve school meal capacity and sustainability, and also strengthen the child and adult care food program known as CACFP. Now, the Healthy Meals, Healthy Kids Act, it modernizes our nation's child nutrition programs to meet the current needs of our children. It puts working families first, and I'm so proud to be supporting it. So, Mr. Blumstead, my questions are for you today. I have 2 questions, given that in our time constraints. Can you just briefly discuss some of the successes that you have seen in your state in regards to child nutrition programs?
Yeah, happy to. And one of the, obviously in the midst of the pandemic, we ended up in a challenging time, and schools became part of a strategy to ensure that children were fed even though they were not in school. And so it was really important. I also appreciate Congress's foresight on advancing funding and making sure that there is funding for feeding children all across the country. As we've come off the kind of those particular concerns and ensuring that there's sufficient strategies there, our schools have worked together to think about those summer programs, expanding the types of opportunities for students. And I continue to believe that obviously everything that impacts a student, if they're coming to school hungry, it's really going to be a challenge. And so we continue to look for ways to expand that. CEP was not actually widely used in Nebraska, so the Community Eligibility Plan, we see more schools asking us to be able to participate in that program as an example anyway of the good things that could happen.
Well, thank you for that. And so my second question then is, what do families and schools need to know about this upcoming school year in terms of assessing school meals? And given that this is the first time in 2 years where families are required to submit paperwork in order to access free or reduced meals.
Yeah, it's actually this summer, or even the end of the school year last year, we had a lot of conversations. I would travel the state and ask superintendents and school district leaders of all types of sizes, and that was one of their major concerns, was reaching back to parents and getting them and encouraging them to submit the paperwork necessary to participate in the food programs. And so we've continued to message. Our schools are talking to us on a regular basis about how they can continue to message. We try to help on that particular message. I'm also a parent. I have 5 children. We got our message from our school going, remember, your food account is not filled up. And so I know that for certain families, that could be a substantial challenge. Nebraska actually provides some additional funding for that and tries to secure that. So we're going to work very hard to ensure that students and families are aware of the need to fill out that paperwork and continue to move on that front as well.
Let me ask you also too, and of course there might be families that don't speak English very well. Are there going to be any provisions made to make those forms additionally in a language, Spanish, for example? We just want to make sure that everyone has access to the ability to be able to constructively fill out the forms. And is there any provisions that you might be making to make those kinds of forms available to everyone?
Yes, and I'll just quickly say, folks might be surprised, but there's about 120 different languages spoken in Nebraska schools, as it's a refugee resettlement area. And all across the state, we see that. And so we work pretty hard with our school districts that have multiple languages to help them with translation services and supports to make sure that they can fill out those forms.
Thank you very much, and I'm out of time.
Well, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. McBath. And now let me please call Ms. Miller, Mrs. Miller of Illinois, please.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
sorry, Mrs. Miller, my apologies. The ranking member of the full committee, Mrs. Fox, is next. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that.
Oh, my God.
I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Dr. Schwinn, most Republicans supported the emergency education assistance provided through the first two rounds of COVID aid in March and December of 2020. We recognized the emergency needs schools were facing and acted. Democrats then pushed through a third round of COVID aid for schools in the American Rescue Plan that Republicans opposed. We argued it wasn't clear schools needed another infusion of taxpayer funds and that we should wait and evaluate the impact of the first two rounds before throwing more money at the system. Democrats now argue that they deserve credit for getting schools reopened because of the American Rescue Plan. In response to that argument, I want to highlight the stats you included in your written statement. You said more than 98% of school districts in Tennessee were open for in-person instruction for at least 90% of the 2020-21 school year, and that every district in the state was open for in-person instruction by March 8, 2021. That date's significant because the American Rescue Plan Act was enacted March 11, 2021. So is it fair to say that the American Rescue Plan played no role in getting schools reopened in Tennessee?
That's correct. 100% of schools were open by March 8th or had that option.
Thank you. To what do you give credit for most schools in Tennessee being open for most of the 2021 school year?
Thank you for the question. I think there were three big components for us. I think first was prioritization. It was looking at the data that we had available at the time, and then certainly prioritizing what we believed was best for students in partnership with our districts. I think the second was the approach. What we like to say in Tennessee is it's how, not if. And so we knew that if we wanted schools open, it was our responsibility to identify solutions for how to make that happen and be true for our students. And that did take the innovation and work of our teachers and administrators. And then third, it was a collective approach. We met every single day as the governor's cabinet with those agencies and departments, whether that was health, our TEMA or emergency response aid, et cetera, to strategize on what our school districts would need in order to maintain that commitment to families and to students. And I think that was an incredibly important part of the work in partnership with our everyday calls with districts for the first year.
Thank you very much. Dr. Schwinn, there's been a lot of discussion today about students' mental health challenges. Both today and in the broader discussions around the country about recovering from COVID, we've also heard a lot about social and emotional learning. I have a lot of concerns with what, quote, social and emotional learning, unquote, means in practice in way too many schools, but the mental health challenges students are facing are real. I also believe schools should have a role to play in addressing students' mental health problems, helping them navigate conflict and so forth. Sometimes addressing those issues is necessary to help a student learn. At the same time, I know parents are concerned that schools are becoming so focused on the students' mental health and social and emotional learning that schools are losing sight of their core mission. In other words, the best way for schools to help students feel better about themselves is actually to teach them to read, do math, and understand the other core subjects. Unfortunately, we have a plethora of data showing that too few students are being taught these things effectively. How do we ensure that the legitimate concerns about students' mental health don't crowd out the core function of schools?
Thank you. I think a really important conversation and topic. I think first and foremost in Tennessee, we talk a lot about the parent is the child's first teacher and must be an authentic partner in their children's education. And so in Tennessee, what we've noted is that the majority of our families do want to be able to work with the school, but they need to be able to do so in a confidential way because these are really sensitive conversations. We have something called our AWARE program, and that is an electronic referral pathway that allows parents to connect with schools and providers outside of the school day so that children do not miss valuable instruction. I think second is that we have to maintain a focus on academics. I think we sometimes underestimate that some of the best things we can do for mental health for students is ensure that they can read on grade level by third grade because that opens up doors for them. We talk about sports and chess club and all sorts of after school activities. Create opportunities within the school day where you have engaging pathways and programs of study for students. It brings up attendance. It ensures students are actually completing an academic program that will be beneficial to them after. And then third, what I would say is that you have to create infrastructure within the state system as well as in local districts so that districts know that they have community partners and resources to help them. And one example I'll give is in Henry County in Tennessee. They partnered very closely with the resources that were available countywide, so students did not miss valuable instructional time. 70% of students improved grades, 89% had a decrease in behavior infractions, and 91% improved their attendance because of those out-of-school partnerships.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Fox. And now I'd like to recommend Mr. Levin, sir. So you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chairman Sablon, and thanks to the witnesses for joining us. States and school districts are facing many challenges this fall, including shortages of teachers and other school staff, as we've discussed some this morning. Data from the Department of Education indicate that teacher vacancies are more common in high poverty schools and in specific subject areas like special ed, STEM, and foreign languages. Additionally, many states struggle to recruit and retain teachers of color, despite a wide body of evidence that suggests teachers of color have many benefits for all students, and particularly for students of color. And again, those things have come up a bit. But Dr. Blumstead, I'd like to ask you to dig into this more. How are vacancies of teachers and other school staff affecting school districts in your state? And can you please describe some of the evidence-based strategies that your state is employing to recruit and retain effective teachers, and particularly teachers of color?
Yeah, and thank you, Congressman. The reality for Nebraska, we were watching teacher shortage develop pre-pandemic, and it was evolving. And in the midst of the pandemic, we've seen even more challenges, just having teachers in the field that are available for the classroom and the immediate needs. I had a teacher advisory panel that I used throughout the pandemic, and I would ask them, what are the types of strategies that would help kind of address the immediate needs as well as the long-term needs of recruiting and retaining teachers, and specifically also diversifying the teacher pipeline for Nebraska. We have a lot of work to do. In the years before even the pandemic, that was one of our goals, to ensure that. We've seen the research that actually students that have teachers that reflect their own community and their own race and ethnicity are really an important part of a strategy to build that, not just for those students, but for all students, to see that depth. And so what we've been doing, we actually have a couple projects underway to recruit teachers. One is in an effort, in fact, Omaha Public Schools has put an effort together using some of their ESSER funds to ensure that they're recruiting teachers and being able to develop strategies that ensure a diverse teacher population, working with their local university. We have so many universities, but the University of Nebraska in this case at Omaha. And so we're also doing a project statewide with University of Nebraska Lincoln on a strategy to specify and work with our Educators Rising programs to identify students earlier that in high school that might want to be teachers, with a particular focus on first-generation teachers as well. And so finding ways to diversify the teaching workforce, we're tracking the data as I was mentioning before, looking at how we can ensure that we make those improvements is going to be really critical for us.
Can I just ask you, given, as you've said more than once, that the teacher shortage issue started before the pandemic, don't you think that until we are able to raise compensation for teachers, I mean, this is a market economy that people have to feed their families. There's a lot of other jobs out there, that it'll be hard ultimately to overcome this shortage?
Yeah, I think a couple different things. Number one, also kind of marketing to teachers that it's a great career for a lot of different reasons in Nebraska has been part of that. But compensation has mattered. It's always mattered within any particular field. And we're seeing other areas raise wages to be able to compete in this environment. We all are seeing that schools in Nebraska are looking at those challenges, trying to find ways to ensure that we can compensate teachers as the professionals they are.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know also that respect for the profession is key, and these constant efforts to tear down teachers and especially their organizations can't be helpful. Let me try to squeeze in a question for Dr. Samuel. You addressed this somewhat in your opening, but this continual sort of bifurcation or separating of social and emotional learning from, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and the idea that these things are contrary to each other or competing with each other. I'm the dad of 4 kids. My youngest is, still in high school. I have talked to all my superintendents, my teachers. The kids have been set back in their emotional development a couple years. I mean, a fourth grader is acting like a second grader and so forth. What can we do to overcome this simplistic view and realize that how crucial it is, the emotional life of kids?
Thank you for that question. And I just want to underscore by reminding everyone that all learning is social and emotional. Right now, we're using the skills that we're talking about that kids need in the classroom. We're talking about data. We're having the courage to have conversations. We're trying to identify solutions. And these are the skills that we as adults use that we also want our students to use and apply in the classroom. And so we cannot bifurcate them. And we have to realize these skills are foundational for all learning because we learn through our emotions and how we connect and through social interaction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I think my time has expired, so I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Mrs. Miller from Illinois is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Schools were given billions of dollars over the past 2.5 years under the guise of a pandemic with no accountability measures to ensure taxpayer dollars were being spent appropriately. Now that President Biden finally claims the pandemic is over, we are now learning taxpayer money that the Democrats said that we needed to respond to the pandemic was actually used to advance their far-left political equity agenda in the classroom. It seems like congressional Democrats and President Biden used the pandemic only to fund the implementation of their radical agenda in our children's classroom. With that, I would like to turn to Dr. Schwinn. Dr. Schwinn, it's no secret that virtual learning for kids has wreaked havoc on their mental and emotional health. There's no replacement for in-person learning, but emails reveal that the Biden administration and the CDC were coordinating with teachers' unions to keep our schools closed. Multiple studies have suggested that union influence affected school operating decisions more than COVID-19. This proves that teacher unions were motivated by politics, not science, and definitely not the interests of our students and their education. We have all seen the data about students' mental health post-pandemic, and it's clear the Biden administration did not put our students' needs first. How much do you think that the Biden administration's slow school reopening process has exacerbated mental health problems for students?
So thank you for the question. I think what we have continued to talk about in Tennessee is that, and I think I said this at the beginning of the pandemic, Tennessee takes care of our own. And so one of the things that we really focus on is what is going to be good for Tennessee, our districts, our state as a whole, and certainly our communities. And what that meant for us is working with our local health professionals as well as our state health professionals. It meant talking to our districts every single day. It meant making sure that we as a state were organized and coordinated in terms of the work that we did. And frankly, it continues to be about locals making the best decisions for their local communities. That has been a hallmark of our work over the last 3 years, both academically and certainly in response to keeping schools open. I think we've been very successful in keeping schools open, and we are seeing the benefits of that now.
But can you share with me how you think keeping schools closed nationwide has exacerbated the children's mental health issues?
Certainly, and I work closely with the Commissioner of Mental Health and Substance Abuse in the state of Tennessee, and one of the things that we do is a partnership. Governor Lee proposed, the governor and the General Assembly approved a $250 million mental health trust fund in order to ensure that we are continuing to support those students who are negatively impacted. What we do find is that those students who are not in-person learning have more need in terms of behavioral health. We are seeing that there is more suicidal ideation within our schools than we've ever seen before, and so we have to invest funds and resources in order to address that very critical and urgent problem that I think has just accelerated more, while it was absolutely an issue going into the pandemic as well.
So you would say the acceleration would be due to the schools being closed, or it could have been due to the schools being closed?
We certainly see data that would suggest that when we compare districts that were fully open versus those that did not offer in-person learning as quickly as others.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desaulniers from California is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for everyone, all the panelists for your work. Having been involved with summer and intercession learning loss in California for many years, pre-COVID, we've taken a lot of that information and helped during this period. So, Dr. Samuel, I'd like to ask you some follow-up, actually, from what Congressman Levine talked about. I'm very proud of work that Congressman Thompson and I have done on family engagement centers around the country, bipartisan work. We know how effective these can be. We're now getting more research as that rolls out around the country. Can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of those kind of facilities during COVID and bright spots we've learned where districts, teachers, administrators, and communities and families have been able to, in spite of COVID, engage with their kids?
Thank you for that question. And I do want to agree with Dr. Schwinn that parents are children's first teacher. So they absolutely must be involved when it comes to all aspects of their kids' education. I am a mom. My boys are in 3rd and 6th grade, and I absolutely expect to be engaged and brought into the conversation on their academic and social and emotional development. I also will say that one of the things we've heard as we've engaged with parents across the nation is that this is more than just academics. They are worried about their kids' fundamental success. And so as 80% of parents across party lines have said that they want schools to continue or expand social emotional learning, we have to continue to listen to parents because they are kids' first teachers. I would like to lift up an example in Texas, El Paso. They have actually developed a committee for families and educators and community members to review and adopt social and emotional learning programs that align to their local priorities. And as we talk about these skills, they're not just life skills, they're not just academic skills, but there was a Wall Street Journal article that was published that showed 92% of executives want these types of skills for their workforce, working collaboratively, making good decisions, being able to understand the perspective of others to solve problems. And even though 92% of our executives want this, they're having a hard time finding candidates who have these skills. So as we talk about academics, as we talk about these skills and competencies, we need to understand that it's not just in the academic setting, it's not just in the social setting, but this also will impact career and life success, regardless of what pathway a student chooses.
And I want to follow up as well on teachers in the workforce and mental health support. So I hear when I go around my district, it's a very diverse district in a high cost area in the San Francisco Bay Area. Always when I talk to administrators and teachers, the need for mental health services for them as they deal with all of the ramifications of not just COVID, but a social model that has put more pressure on two income parents and single parents. So could you talk, and this is all in the context of since the Affordable Care Act, there has been a growing demand in requests for services for mental health professionals, but a sort of unfortunate decrease in young people going into the field. I recently met with a couple of recent psychologists who had $300,000 in student debt, and they're under that pressure. So Dr. Samuel, in the emotional social engagement, how do we provide the services in this environment that we all recognize have been, fortunately, the stigma has been removed dramatically. That's the good news is, but we have to deploy these services. Could you speak to that?
Yes, so I hear that you're concerned about the mental health of our educators, and I want to underscore the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And right now, as we talk about educating children, the entire village is enduring some kind of stress, which you have mentioned, whether it is the students, the parents, the school personnel, everybody who touch children, communities, they are under stress, which is why it is so important to focus on not only the social emotional needs of our kids, but our educators and school personnel. And we know that when we focus on adult SEL, And our educators, they can teach more effectively. They model the behaviors that we want from our kids. They're able to build and maintain stronger relationships. And we know relationships are a key proxy to engagement. They're able to demonstrate more patience and empathy for their kids, and they're less likely to report burnout. We have to holistically consider the needs of our adults and kids.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jacobs is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the panelists here. Very informative. Dr. Schwinn, I wonder if you'd mind elaborate a bit on the success or what you've been doing in terms of the tutoring for the children. I think that's an interesting approach.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely. So we started Tennessee All-Core. That was part of legislation that was passed in January 2021. It has several parts. The first are grants to school districts. It's matching grants to provide high-dosage tutoring. That's 1 to 3 students maximum for 30 to 45 minutes, 2 to 3 times per week. We've funded enough for 150,000 seats. That is now sustained in our new funding formula forevermore because we've seen such powerful impacts. The second is community grants. For those districts that aren't participating, we have provided additional funding for community organizations to provide that same high-dosage, low-ratio tutoring. We provided micro grants to 14,000 families in low-income communities specific to early literacy, tutoring, and instruction so that we can ensure those students most negatively impacted by the pandemic in schools that were not open for in-person instruction can get that in partnership with our families. And then finally, we're offering free online, on-demand tutoring for high school students so that they're not pulled out of classes, they can still participate in after-school programs and receive tutoring in the exact and specific area that they need help with whenever it is that they need that help and assistance to ensure we have a pre-K through 12th grade approach. We expect it to serve over 200,000 students in a state that's about 965,000 in terms of enrollment.
And so is this typically after school you're doing this? Is that
We have multiple programs. So we've actually seen that the most strategic place for us is in school. It is also a strategy for addressing the teacher shortage issue. So our districts are hiring full-time credentialed teachers, sometimes retirees or career changers. They are then doing the tutoring during their intervention block and very, very small group instruction. I will call out, though, that we have a great example in Union County for after-school programming where they are retired or existing teachers tutoring their own students or their students from the prior year. They already have relationships with the families, and they actually schedule the tutoring sessions in partnership with families. So the trust is there. The tutor is very well trained, certainly as a certified teacher. They are compensated well above and beyond what they would normally get in terms of their salary. And they already have those strong relationships and knowledge base, so there's consistency with the curriculum and the approach at that specific school site.
And is there any evaluation you're going to be doing to see the impact?
Absolutely. So in English language arts, we look at their benchmark assessments. We also have a relationship with Zern, so we get that data in actually on a monthly basis. We look at what practices are showing very strong acceleration at the school level, at the district level, and then actually with individual students. And our team goes into districts and partnerships with them in our networks. We have tutoring networks that are starting this year to be able to evaluate the data, make adjustments on what is working and what's not working so that we can see that accelerated growth in every program. Districts also work very closely with one another. We are a very collegial state, so our regions meet monthly to talk about problems of practice and ensure that the implementation is of the highest quality.
And did you do anything over the summer? Was there anything?
Yes, it is year-round. So we have a summer program that is now codified in law forevermore. It's 4 to 6 weeks of additional instruction for students, prioritizing those that are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, or those that are not at grade level proficiency. That high-dosage tutoring model is also part of that summer instruction.
Oh, that's great. I was on the Buffalo School Board, and for a period of time, we did summer programming to try to combat the significant learning loss. And I don't think it was as well structured as what you're describing, but it was effective. Unfortunately, we didn't have the resources to continue it. But thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I want to start with Dr. Samuel. First of all, thank you to all our witnesses for being here. Dr. Samuel, can you operationalize social and emotional learning for me? What does it look like day to day in our schools, and why is it so important to implement social and emotional learning as we seek to accelerate learning for all students?
Thank you for that question. And you know, the operationalizing SEL, there's, like I said, it's not a one size approach, but I can give you a couple of examples of how it might play out. There's been a lot of conversation around the role of SEL in math. Let's take that as an example. So if you have an algebra teacher who's teaching a really complex multiple step problem, one way that teacher can operationalize SEL in their classroom is by putting the problem in front of the students and asking them first to think independently about the problem. Then as students are thinking independently, they have developed their own perspective. And then bringing those groups together so students can talk about the various approaches to solve that math problem. And what that is doing is opening up conversation and dialogue for kids to understand different perspectives. We're still dealing with the content, which is algebra. We're still dealing with multiple step complex problems, but we're bringing students together to understand different perspectives, which is also what we need in the workplace. Then helping students share and analyze that data to then be able to come up with their response. So social emotional learning is interwoven into that entire academic instruction. Also, we can talk about it as far as relationships. We know one thing that's super important for kids is they want to make friends. And so how do we help kids in these social settings talk about different perspectives, be able to create and foster these strong relationships, which we know they'll need. And so I think it's also important to understand that social emotional learning looks different depending on where you are on the developmental continuum. So the conversation with elementary might be different than high school. So it really just can take a wide variety of approaches and strategies, which is why it's so important to ensure that our educators also have these skills to be able to explicitly intertwine them into instruction, but also be able to foster these opportunities in more informal ways as well.
You mentioned earlier how 92% of executives are looking for employees who have emotional intelligence, strong emotional intelligence. In your response there, you identified other 21st century skills as well, the skills of curiosity, the skills of creativity, the skills of collaborative problem solving, the skills of communication. As a former educator, I've often been frustrated by how our annual standardized tests do not measure these skills. As we think of the evolution of public schools going forward, how might schools do better to ensure that we are teaching 21st century skills in our schools and using formative, on-the-ground school assessment approaches to enhance these skills in our students?
Thank you for that question, and also making the connection to so many of the skills that we're talking about. And I believe Dr. Schwinn also talked about the importance of innovation, and we should holistically be thinking about innovation in education. And one of the things that we're doing at Castle is looking at aligning our workforce and SEL efforts so that we can help make those intentional connections on what these skills mean for not just education, but also into the workforce. And so it's really important to think about how are we embedding these skills, not only in the K-12 setting, but then also as we think about college and career. And so it is time for us to think about innovation. I will also say that we are seeing states in some districts begin to use school climate data and other components to talk about their social emotional approaches and see how students are feeling.
Absolutely. Thank you for that response. I also want to add the importance of project-based learning being implemented in our schools as well, which encourages students working together to solve problems and create a project that meets the needs of not just school, but the larger community. Ms. Jordan, would you like to add anything regarding teaching curiosity and creativity and collaborative learning in our schools? I know we only got about 20 seconds, but would you like to add anything there?
Well, I'll say that I was just looking at our data. About a third of the school districts are spending on social emotional learning, either to do training for teachers, to bring in curriculum or materials. Also, we see more than a third are bringing in school psychologists so that, or social workers or mental health professionals of some sort, so that they have that deeper support. And a lot of districts are investing in multi-tiered systems of support, which provide, for all the kids a certain level of comfort and social emotional learning. For kids who are having problems, some targeted support, and for kids who really need wraparound services, they're providing those as well. So we're seeing an extensive investment in that work in these ESSER plans.
Thank you so much. Mr. Cawthorn from North Carolina is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Owens. I really appreciate your leadership in the subcommittee. To all our witnesses, thank you very much. Dr. Schwinn, my question's for you. Due to government regulations and shutdowns during the pandemic, students were forced to be removed from in-person learning. Consequently, reading scores are down, and the largest average decline since 1990, and the first ever decline in math. You mentioned tutoring. I'm assuming this is out-of-school tutoring, correct?
It's both in school and out of school.
Understood. Students already are in school for around 7 hours a day. Do you have other implementations and strategies that have been proven to be successful during the course of the day that could help maximize the time that they are already spending during the school day instead of additional time added on to the end of the school day?
Absolutely, and I think that's why our approach has shifted from before and after school tutoring to during school tutoring, because we certainly know that, especially in those elementary school grades, 7.5 hours is a long day for some. I've got little kids at home. And so one of the things that we did is we worked directly with school districts and specific schools and school leaders to redesign the school schedule. We have a block that's response to intervention. That block is about 45 minutes. So we're now using high dosage tutoring within that block. The other thing that we're doing is we're working directly with families. We know that families prioritize their students' overall well-being, health, and certainly academic outcomes. And so a lot of our families are looking at out-of-school time that makes sense for their schedules. And the last thing I'll say is that it's also about what we are teaching within the blocks of time that we have. Our focus on systematic phonics instruction in the science of reading, ensuring every child is reading on grade level by 3rd grade, will remain a strong priority in the state of Tennessee because we know that changes lives, and that's actually what we really need to make sure those minutes matter as much as anything else.
Well, Dr. Schwinn, I think that's an incredibly holistic approach. You know, that actually answered my second question as well. So I really do appreciate your time. I appreciate your wisdom and what you're doing in Tennessee. I think is a great way to try and make up for the lost time we had for in-person learning. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Cawthorn. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Sempolinski from New York, the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Chairman. And as this is my first subcommittee here, I just want to comment how happy I am to be on this subcommittee. Frankly, I think it's the most important subcommittee on Capitol Hill right now as we're coming out of this COVID pandemic and all the issues that we're dealing with the parents are facing right now. So to the chairman and the ranking member, thanks for having me on the committee. My wife, Angie, is a school teacher who had to teach through hybrid learning through the pandemic. She would see half her students one day while the other half sat at home, probably playing video games or with their computers on mute. The next day, those groups would change places. She was in the classroom. She'd have the different kids that weren't there before. And so you're effectively cutting their learning time and education for that particular school year in half. We now know that there were a number of factors that contributed to the COVID learning gap, but despite millions and millions of dollars being poured into schools at the behest of the American Federation of Teachers, we still have record low test scores and comprehension. America's falling behind. We still need answers. And frankly, during my first markup last week, as I'm the most junior member of the House of Representatives, so my first markup last week, I was stunned to watch as my friends on the other side of the aisle blocked efforts by this committee to find out where all this money's gone, what collusion happened, and whether any of this is actually helping our kids. But my question is for Dr. Schwinn. You indicated in your written testimony that your state was using summer programming and tutoring to combat learning loss in 2020 and 2021. There's been some questions about that. I'm interested to hear more of your thoughts on how these and other supplementary programs may be used to help our children recover what they've lost, education, mental, social health, because of all the harmful effects of shutdowns, mass mandates, and quarantines.
Thank you for the question. What I want to start by saying is certainly that we could not do this without the exceptional folks in our school buildings districts, our community partners, and that this is really hard. We have taken an approach of going deep in a few areas as opposed to kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And so we focused on academics, Early literacy is an absolute priority in the state of Tennessee, and ensuring that we have a comprehensive approach where everyone is able to contribute to ensuring every child is reading on grade level by 3rd grade. I think second is high dosage tutoring, which I've spoken to in terms of the scale and depth of that programming. Something I haven't talked about, though, is really looking at innovative middle school and high school models. We know that we have to ensure that our pre-K through 12th grade programs are all exceptional, and that our middle and high school students who saw some of the most negative impacts because of that social development that they did not get if they were not in in-person instruction, they need to be part of the programs that are going to help them to the jobs or careers that they choose for themselves after graduation. And then finally, I think that our work in Grow Your Own and the teacher apprenticeship work is incredibly important. We have about 1,000 vacancies in the state of Tennessee. Our Grow Your Own work is filling 650 of them within the first 3 years, as well as ensuring that 5,000 additional teachers are able to have credentials in other areas that are high needs, such as special education, English as a second language, and mathematics and science.
And then my final question is, also directed to Dr. Schwinn, as a education professional, what would you say, just your assessment overall, just how permanent the effects of the pandemic will be on this cohort of students as they move forward through the rest of their lives?
So I will say that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity right now to do the right thing for kids. We have an extraordinary amount of funding, and I think that with that funding that came in, we have a responsibility to spend it well and really hold ourselves accountable to the outcomes of that funding. In Tennessee, we are using that specifically to ensure that every single student has access to an education that is at and above the quality they would have received otherwise. We are measuring our progress not by growth from last year. We are looking at what the growth would have been year over year before the pandemic, and then seeing when we're looking at 2025 and 2026, did we see that students are actually where they would have been had the pandemic never happened? That is our baseline measure of what we need to expect out of ourselves in order to ensure that our students are not negatively impacted. Based on the rate of growth that we're seeing in Tennessee, I am confident that our teachers, our principals, our school communities are getting that done. They're doing that with hard work. They're doing that, frankly, with pure grit and determination, but it's also a very strategic use of spending dollars in a way that's going to invest in children, because that needs to be our #1 priority at all times.
Yeah, so I just want to reemphasize what you just said, and correct me if I'm wrong in the way you said it. To catch up to where they would be otherwise is an extraordinary amount of effort on behalf of everybody in your department and the teachers and the staff and everybody that's involved in educating students in your state.
Absolutely, without question.
All right, well, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from New York, and I also welcome him to the subcommittee. Thank you very much. And so now for all her patients, I recognize the gentle lady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair Sablon, for holding this important hearing. I want to start by responding briefly to my colleague from Georgia. I'm sorry he's not here anymore. Representative Allen compared the U.S. test scores for our students in the United States with test scores of students in other countries and asked what we could do. I have a couple of suggestions. We could start by joining essentially every other industrialized nation and offer paid family leave. Other countries have weeks, months, or up to a year of paid family leave. The U.S. in the United States, less than 15% of families have access to paid family leave. And I invite my colleague to join me in getting that passed. Additionally, many of those other countries have universal health care. They also have, many if not most of them, affordable, high-quality childcare and access to quality early childhood education. Those policies make a tremendous difference in the overall educational career of students. So I've long been and back to the topic at hand, but I thought those were important points to raise. I've long been a proponent of whole child education because it includes social, emotional, mental, physical, as well as cognitive development of students. And I thank my colleague, Representative McBath, for pointing out the importance of child nutrition, an issue that we work on the subcommittee I chair, Civil Rights and Human Services. So this whole child approach involves a team approach from teachers, from parents, administrators, counselors, community organizations, social workers. In the district I represent in Northwest Oregon, school districts have been intentional about social and emotional learning during the pandemic and the recovery. They've hired more school counselors in Washington County. They've committed American Rescue Plan funding toward mental and behavioral health support in the Portland Public School District. And I want to ask Dr. Samuel, we know the significant mental and emotional toll of the pandemic. has been increasingly clear as students are especially all returning for in-person learning. And those programs that are designed to address a student's social, emotional, and academic development, we know they can help equip educators with the skills and resources necessary to better address those complex and evolving needs of their students. So the whole child approach to education is especially important as students continue to recover. And I also want to put a plug in for my Arts Education for All legislation. We know art helps heal. We use it with veterans. It can help students as well. So Dr. Samuel, how can social and emotional learning initiatives not only help children, students, but also how can educators get the skills and resources needed to address complex students' needs? And how can schools and districts best prepare and support educators to teach students their social and emotional skills they need and integrate them into teaching those skills into other aspects of curriculum?
Thank you for that question. And I just wanted to also acknowledge you making the reference to all the other supports that other countries have in place. And I also want to underscore the international interest we've received on social emotional learning. In just the last 8 months, we've had over half a dozen countries reach out to us at CASEL inquiring about social emotional learning and how they can implement social emotional learning countrywide. And so it's important to note that this is not just an issue here in the United States, but this is truly a global issue. And so we should be paying close attention to ensure that our children can compete, not just here in the US, but globally as well. And so going back to your question, social and emotional learning doesn't just support students' academic learning. We know it helps teachers in the classroom, which is why we really need to be thinking about pre-service and in-service sides of teaching and how we can ensure the right teacher preparation program supports for our educators, but then also the right level of professional development for them as they're learning SEL and wanting to ensure the implementation of these programs in their districts. And many of the districts that we work with have embedded social emotional learning throughout their staff roles. And it's important to note, it's not just the educator, but all staff roles, which mean all personnel, whether it's the bus driver, school nutrition, the classroom teacher, the office manager, are all trained in SEL as part of their onboarding and ongoing professional learning, because we know that kids have relationships within buildings that go beyond just the classroom teacher. We also know and have seen that they're embedding social emotional learning into some of their recruitment efforts, job description, interview questions. And so it's important that we note that in order to build educator excellence and staff retention, social emotional learning plays a key role.
Thank you, and my time is about to expire, so I do have a follow-up question about NAEP that I'm going to ask Ms. Jordan. I'm going to follow up with that, and I may also follow up, as you mentioned, Dr. Samuels, the importance of teachers being prepared for social emotional learning about what's happening in educator programs in higher education. So my time's expired. I yield back. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to join you.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. Thank you for your patience. Still, and now having all member questions being asked, I remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, materials for submission for the hearing record must be submitted to the committee clerk within 14 days following the last day of the hearing. So by close of business on October 4th, 2022, preferably in Microsoft Word format. The material submitted must address the subject matter of the hearing. Only a member of the subcommittee or an invited witness may submit materials for inclusion in the hearing record. Documents are limited to 50 pages each. Documents longer than 50 pages will be incorporated into the record via an internet link that you must provide to the committee clerk within the required time frame, but please recognize that in the future that link may no longer work. Pursuant to House rules and regulations, items for the record should be submitted to the clerk electronically by emailing submissions to edanlabor.hearings@mail.house.gov. So that's edanlabor.hearings@mail.house.gov. Now, again, I want to thank all our witnesses for their participation today. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you, and we ask the witnesses to please respond to those questions in writing. The hearing record will be held open for 14 days in order to receive those responses. I remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, witness questions for the hearing record must be submitted to the majority committee staff or committee clerk within 7 days. The question submitted must address the subject matter of the hearing. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Owens, for a closing statement. Thank you.
Thank you again to all the witnesses. I really appreciate it. What I love about our system in this country is that our states do serve as laboratories. And we get Americans that are all in, the things we can come up with innovative-wise, it's remarkable. That's when you use a couple words, pure grit. And I just want to say that this is truly an opportunity of a lifetime for us to show pure grit, to make sure all our kids are coming out of this process and no one is left behind as we go into the future. I see innovation, I see a collaboration, teachers that are truly all in, they love what they do, they need to be compensated to make sure that we get the best and keep the best. This is a moment that if we take advantage of this, not only bringing our kids back, but set up a system in which, from this point on, we do not trail anyone around the world. So I want to thank everyone who's taken part in this process, those who love our kids in this profession. This is a profession that truly needs to, again, step up. This is going to be our future, and I look forward to working with you guys as much as we can to make sure that happens. So thanks so much for your participation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Owens. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making my closing statement. Well, thank you again to our witnesses for your time and testimony. Thank all my colleagues for joining us today. Now, Democrats know that to fully recover from the pandemic, students need more time in the classroom and access to social and emotional support. Educators need more resources like school psychologists and classroom aides, and to ensure every student succeeds, parents need to be partners in their child's education. Very much important. Today, our witnesses made clear that thanks to the investments made by congressional Democrats and President Biden, school districts have resources to meet those needs and get back on track. There's so many interesting stories coming up today, but all of them were based that the money was there to implement them. Let's not forget that, basic. So regrettably, instead of delivering what students and parents and educators need, some of my colleagues have been banning, the Republicans have been banning books, punishing educators, diverting valuable time and resources away from the classrooms. And as I have said earlier, we, the Democrats, are committed to putting politics aside, delivering sustained funding to K-12 schools, particularly those in communities with the greatest need. So thank you again to our witnesses for your time and all you do on behalf of our nation's students. If there's no further business without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.